Alright guys, so today we're going to get really geeky about elections and election results, and more specifically the most recent by-election, which was Newport West. If you're wondering why I'm getting specifically so geeky about this, it's because it bears relevance on the local elections coming up. We might be having European elections coming up, and of course, if all goes to pot with the Brexit negotiations, Theresa May could call a snap election, or there could be a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, which would create an election as well. This is why it's super important to talk about elections and try and work out how the parties are going to turn out after the election. So these were the results back in 2017. Conservatives lost 13 seats, Labour gained 30. Remember, they had a really good campaign. The SNP lost seats. Remember, independence was a huge topic around their party at the time. The Lib Dems failed to make progress on Brexit anxiety. The DUP gained 2 seats, and of course they formed the government with the Conservatives in the end, and then others losing 2 seats. Now let's take a look at Newport West more specifically. So Newport West, which is down in this area of the country, voted to leave by 53.66% and voted to remain by 46.34%. So not that dissimilar from the overall outcome of the entire country. Back in 2017, Newport West had Paul Flynn as MP. Don't forget he died earlier this year. That's why they had this by-election in the first place. In second place was Angela Jones. Both the main parties in that election gained a vote share of 11% and 6.8%, while UKIP, if you remember, under Paul Nuttall, was very unpopular, losing 12.7% of the vote share and losing vote share throughout the whole country. Along with all the other parties, remember this was a very binary vote. The public in general gravitated towards the two main parties, and that was the change in vote share. So Labour gained, while all the other parties lost out. So what happened in 2019 in this by-election was that Labour held the seat. So in a sense, nothing has changed because it was a Labour seat. Labour retained that seat, and Ruth Jones is now the new Labour MP for Newport West. However, Conservatives were not that far behind. UKIP gained, and all the other third parties gained from the last election, and the turnout was particularly low at 37.1%, possibly because it's a by-election, but also because trust in politics in general is particularly low, and people are trusting the main two parties much less. In terms of the House of Commons, of course, this gives Labour a slightly bigger percentage in Parliament, but it's not really going to influence proceedings that much. Because it's only one seat, but of course it takes away from the government and the DUP coalition. So looking at the vote share then, the vote share for Labour was obviously the most. It still retains the most. It's a Labour held seat. It's been a Labour seat since the 1980s, and it doesn't look like it's going to change from a Labour seat anytime soon because the Tories just aren't as popular in that seat. But it's interesting, this is a seat where UKIP are the third most popular party. If we take a look at the vote share changes, like I said, Labour lost out 12.7%. The Tories lost out 8%. UKIP gained 6.1%. Plaid gained 2.5%. Lib Dems gained 2.4%. And the Greens 2.8%. What does this mean? Well, it shows that the Labour stance on Brexit and the Tory stance on Brexit is not working, whereas the UKIP and all the other parties' stance on Brexit is working. Why is that? Well, what I found from your comments and the people polling in my community posts is that most people either want to leave without a deal or to remain in the EU and do that by having a second referendum. Now, for Labour, they are offering a second referendum, but as of right now, they're talking with the Tories about creating some kind of customs union deal. We know the Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is not in favour of a second referendum, and they've been a bit unclear as to whether or not they would actually impose a second referendum. Also, a second referendum has not won a majority in Parliament, partly because Labour have so far abstained or failed to find party unity to be able to vote in favour of a second referendum. So, people are turning towards these other left-wing parties that are clearly offering a second referendum, and their entire parties are voting for them. The Greens, Plaid, the Lib Dems, all those parties are doing well. However, those parties are split amongst three, whereas if you compare it to the people that want a hard Brexit over, say, a Tory Brexit, the withdrawal agreement, then you've really got between UKIP, the Brexit Party, and the Tories. Of course, in this election, UKIP gained majorly out of the Tories' losses, but also out of, I suggest, Labour losses as well. Let's not forget that many UKIP voters back in 2015 went towards Labour. They then went back to Labour back in 2017, only to go back to UKIP in 2019 because they want a hard Brexit, perhaps leaving the EU without a deal, or they want their vote to leave the EU fully enacted, and they want a party they can trust to do that. They do not trust in the two main parties, particularly the two main leaders, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, has gone down a lot recently. This would mean that as of right now, when the Tories and Labour are in sort of a semi-coalition with each other, trying to find a Brexit deal, Labour will be pushed towards these parties here to try and win over voters that are voting for these other parties, and try to get a second referendum as part of their policy and attached to the deal. As for the Tories, they are at massive risk of giving up the idea of leaving without a deal, because if they give up that idea, then a lot of their voters will turn towards parties like UKIP and other hard Brexit parties that want to see us leave the EU as soon as possible. So what does it mean for the country as a whole? Well, this is a map of the UK's polling as of 2017 with the vote shares represented in these numbers here. And I wanted to try and work out by changing the voting percentages as was applied to Newport West to the whole country, and to see what that does to places like Scotland, where the SNP are hugely popular, and Wales, parts of Wales where Plaid are popular. So let's take this Labour vote share down by 12%. So 41 minus 12 is 29. And let's see what happens. And instantly they lose. And you see they've just lost Penistone and Stocksbridge. Where else have they? They've just lost another seat in Scotland. They've just lost Dewsbury, Wokingham. I think that's just North Devon's just gone Lib Dem. Rother Valley's gone. And you see they lose huge swathes in the north of England, giving a Conservative majority of 82. But let's not forget the Conservatives were also unpopular in the Newport election. So let's also take the Conservative vote share down by 8%. So 43 minus 8 is 35. And Stirling has just gone back to the SNP. Cerrydon's become a Lib Dem gain. Workington's become a Labour hold. Labour are gaining back all these northern areas again. High Peak has gone to Labour. Gordon has become SNP. Plaid has taken Dwyfyn I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Okay, so now you can see that Labour are short by 42 seats, leaving a hung parliament. And of course, the SNP still take the majority of Scotland. But the Lib Dems weren't that popular either, because the leftist parties pretty much spread out amongst themselves over who was offering the second referendum, and so voters spread out amongst them. The Lib Dems gained a vote share of 2.4%. So you see that the Lib Dems and others are on 20 plus 6%. So let's equalise the Lib Dems so that they have 13% and others have 13%. And then let's add another 2% to each of them, so 14% each. So we're going to take this down by 6%. And North Herefordshire gone. And let's increase the others to 14. Barnaf Buchan has gone. Dumfries and Galloway has gone. Kilmarnock West and South Pembrokeshire has gone to Labour. Sherwood has become a Labour gain. Shrewsbury has become a Labour gain. And we can see that Labour would have a hung parliament short by 9 seats. But then we have to add in the UKIP vote and add 6% to 8%. So that would give the UKIP vote 14% of the vote share as well. Now, I'll admit, as I change these numbers, because I haven't done my maths right, they will automatically take down the others because obviously you can only have a vote share of 100. But let's take UKIP up 6% to 14%. See what happens there. I certainly didn't see anything change in that map, which is very interesting. Even though UKIP would have gained a massive amount of vote share, if we were to do that, they would only be able to achieve no seats in the Houses of Parliament. Labour would be short of a majority by 9 seats. The SNP would take Scotland, and there'd be a large Lib Dem gain as well throughout the country. So it looks likely that we would see some form of Labour, Lib Dem, or Labour and other party coalition, perhaps Labour and SNP coalition. I know many of you will want to know how popular UKIP are, and more importantly, how much influence they have on the UK elections. So let's increase the UKIP vote share to see when they only achieve a seat at 17% of the vote share, and that's 1 seat down in Thurrock. And as soon as I increase the UKIP vote share, it gives Labour a higher majority. In fact, it takes a vote share of at least 35% for UKIP to even have any influence as a major party on the UK political scene. And it's highly unlikely that UKIP would do that, and we're more likely to see a UKIP majority of about 14-15% of the vote share, leaving a hung parliament in the Houses of Parliament. And a future election would mean that the parties have to form a coalition. None of the major parties want that, so you can expect to see the Labour Party trying to keep that second referendum promise within their manifesto, and of course the Tories be in excruciating agony and division to try and keep the no deal option within their party's manifesto as well. And that's why the current negotiations going on between Labour and the Tories could either destroy the parties or create a kind of new division where the kind of more Remain side of Labour forms a coalition with the Remainer smaller parties, and the more hard Brexit side of the Tories forms a coalition with UKIP, and the moderates in the middle, that's those people that were quite happy with a customs union or a single market deal, would become the new centre party that would also be hugely unpopular in the next election. For people like the independent group, they have to now try and work out a way of forming a coalition with people like the Lib Dems, Plaid, the Greens, to be able to form that second referendum majority in Parliament and therefore be able to deliver on that second referendum and gain those votes. Otherwise, voters will split amongst all of those parties, and none of those parties will particularly be able to gain from Brexit. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.